For a long time, when most people think of Broadway musicals, they think of show tunes, posh, big dance productions. Historically, the most popular musicals people would name when thinking about Broadway would be Phantom of the Opera, West Side Story, Wicked, Oklahoma, The Music Man, or The Sound of Music. These shows are fantastic, and their musical styles are indicative of a well-established and understood musical theater canon. However, some of the most popular musicals to break into pop culture in the 21st century have been examples such as Hamilton and In the Heights, which utilize an ostensibly different sonic approach than traditional musicals. By utilizing hip-hop to inform the language of the show, Lin-Manuel Miranda created two award-winning musicals that have created more attention and love than many musicals made in the past 2 decades. In pop culture, over the past 40 years, hip-hop has become more and more influential and popular, and it seems to be influencing Broadway. Many new musicals that are making their way around theaters across the country are distinguishing themselves as hip-hop musicals, and this trend doesn't seem to be going anywhere. In this video essay, I'll be diving into the history of hip-hop and its relationship with the music theater art form, and trying to understand why musicals like Hamilton have broken the mold and what it means for the future of Broadway. Hip-hop is a multifaceted art form that found its beginnings in the Bronx in the 1970s. The foundational aspects of hip-hop are that of DJing, breaking, MCing, and graffiti art. This culture began as an expression of resistance against systemic oppression and racial injustice, and it quickly became a global phenomenon. However, in the past few decades, hip-hop has become more commercially and mainstream understood as simply a genre of music. While this isn't untrue, it doesn't give full credit to the totality that is hip-hop culture, which is an entire culture and community that was bred in New York City. Another multifaceted art form bred in New York City is that of musical theater. Book musicals, the first versions of modern musicals, began in New York and saw artists come together for performances that were more than just song and dance shows, but fully realized stories. I think from a geographical standpoint, the fact that both of these artistic communities and forms began in New York gives them a spiritual connection. And in hip-hop songs, we see references to Broadway and the difference between lower-income neighborhoods versus the ritzy upper class of central Manhattan.
Don't criticize the way that I parlay. This ain't Broadway. We learned it the hard way.
Despite hip-hop theater seemingly being a recent trend for some audience members, one of the first times hip-hop truly made its way onto Broadway was Bring in the Noise, Bring in the Funk. This was a show produced by Savion Glover, and it used tap dance and hip-hop music to tell the story of African American history. In the 90s, another example of hip-hop entering the musical theater canon would be Jam on the Groove. An off-Broadway show that would open doors for hip-hop artists to collaborate with Broadway performers. However, some musical historians trace even earlier examples of hip-hop influence entering the mind of musical creators. For example, in a show as iconic as Into the Woods, some theater artists consider The Witch's Rap as an homage by Stephen Sondheim to the wordplay of the 80s in rap music.
Greens, greens, and nothing but greens. Parsley, peppers, cabbages, and celery, asparagus, and watercress, and fiddlefors, and lettuce. He said, all right.
And in the same year as Bring in a Noise, Bring in a Funk, Jonathan Larson's Rent features a song, Today for You, that clearly takes influence from hip-hop MC wordplay as well.
First got the dog disappear. This Aki talk, every talk, just won't shut up. I believe if you play non-stop, that pup will breathe its very last high-strung breath.
Entering into the 2000s, when discussing hip-hop space on Broadway, it's impossible to ignore the influence of Lin-Manuel Miranda. While the 90s saw shows that utilized hip-hop musical influences or styles, In the Heights was one of the first major mainstream musicals that heavily used rap to tell its story, with its main protagonist rapping rather than singing across most of the show.
as people hop to work, bust it. I'm like $1, $2, $1.50, $1.69. I got it. You want a box of condoms? What kind? That's 2 quarters, 2 quarter waters. The New York Times, you need a bag for that. The taxes got it. Once you get some practice at it.
Utilizing this style of music for this piece was essential given that it told the story of Washington Heights, a predominantly Afro-Latino community, and using a blend of hip-hop, salsa, and traditional Broadway show tunes to create a vibrant sound that even found its place on mainstream music charts. Additionally, In the Heights was the first musical to hit the Broadway stage that features all 4 of the hip-hop elements in it. And while I've given examples of shows that utilize a lot of musical elements, there are also shows that are super connected to other aspects of hip-hop, just like In the Heights. An example of this would be Ain't Too Proud, which is a musical about the Temptations. Motown preceded hip-hop, but the dance styles created by the Temptations choreographer Charlie Atkins was the foundational movement that would inspire Soul Train in the earliest days of breaking. Following In the Heights, Lin-Manuel Miranda's blend of rap and musical theater would become quite desired, and he would go on to make rap-centered songs for productions like Bring It On the Musical, Hamilton, and even Disney films like Moana and Encanto. However, despite the popularity, even Lin-Manuel Miranda has received criticism from some who claim his use of hip-hop and Afro-Latino culture in his shows is problematic. This concern comes from the fact that Broadway has traditionally been seen as a ritzy, posh art form that serves affluent white communities. Meanwhile, hip-hop is an art form that was built and developed for audiences and artists of oppressed communities as a way of expression and communication. While Miranda has argued his shows act as a means to diversify and challenge the classist structure of Broadway, the conversation about what Broadway is or isn't is one artists in this space should be having. Historically, Broadway has been an art form that serves white people, and often even when shows make their way to New York City and center stories from diverse communities, it seems those stories can be filtered or adjusted to serve white consumers. Hip-hop is a multifaceted form of DJing, MCing, breaking, and graffiti art that was bred in oppressed communities, and often the most iconic hip-hop music our society has heard have messages of social justice. While Broadway is often seen as elitist and disconnected from reality, I think as hip-hop becomes a more common style of music for Broadway, there needs to be effort to make sure those shows don't strip away the essence of hip-hop in service of ticket sales. And one can only hope that cultural stakeholders are being invited to be a part of the process of making the show. Which was true in the 90s with a show like Jam on the Groove. A definite positive about hip-hop's growing presence in Broadway is that we are seeing new audiences introduced to the art form, especially given the massive success of a show like Hamilton. And while I love Lin-Manuel Miranda, it seems that we just need to be sure that our industry is also giving a diverse group of hip-hop artists a platform to showcase their talents to a broader audience.